So you're ready to start using your lab notebook. One of the things that we'll need to learn is how we go about using a lab notebook and what it's meant to do. First thing you want to do is get your name on it. So on the front cover somewhere, please just write your name, nice permanent marker, legibly, preferably, so that everyone knows that it is your awesome lab notebook. Alright, the first thing in any lab notebook, if you open it, will be a table of contents. So at the top of that heading section there, you can just write in nice big letters, table of contents. And your table of contents will have just two pieces of information in it. It will have the lab title or lab name in one column, and it will have the page number that you can find that particular lab on. So if you're going to put page numbers in here, that means you're going to need to physically go in and write in page numbers. I would prefer that you put them down in the bottom right hand corner. So I'm just going to slide this down here so you can see what I'm talking about. So down here in the bottom right hand corner, I'm just going to start by labeling this as page 1. You can circle it or not, it's kind of up to you. Now we only number the right hand facing pages. So in other words, when I flip this over, page 2 is going to be over here on the right. It's not going to be on the left. The reason why we do that is we only write on the right hand facing pages. So just go ahead and label about the first 10 pages or so. This will just get you started. And then as you use your notebook throughout the semester, you can continue to add page numbers. Alright, so back to the table of contents here. You will just write in the title of the lab for each lab that you do. So I'm just going to make something up here. I'm going to say kinetics lab. Now this isn't the title of your first lab, so don't write that in there. And then over here you could put some dots going over to it if you want to. Not really necessary. And then you put the page number that it starts on or the whole page range. I would recommend leaving 2 pages for your table of contents in case you fill this all up. So I'm actually going to start my kinetics lab. I'm going to start that on page 3 because I'm going to leave page 2 if I need it for a table of contents. Then I'll go over to page 3, and this is where I'll start. Alright, at the top of the beginning of every lab, you will write a heading. And here's what your heading will look like. You'll put the title of the lab or the lab name at the top. I'm just going to do this in general. I'm not going to do it for any specific lab. You'll put the title on the top there. Nice big letters so it's easy to find. If there's a subtitle to it or something, you could put that underneath as well. After the subtitle, if there is one, you put your name and only put your name. Okay, so obviously my name, you can see there. Okay, so this is your name. Below that, that's where you write any partner's names that you might be working with. Okay, partner, name, or names. The reason that is we want to identify that this is your work by putting your name first, and then your partner's names would go below that. And then the last thing we put in the heading is the date of experimental work. In other words, you don't put the date it's due, you don't put the date that you get the lab handout, whatever day or days that you're going to actually be doing the work, that's what goes in here. Okay, so it might be just one day, it might be a couple of days to put in there. Alright, so there's our heading. I would really recommend skipping a couple lines. In fact, I would say it's required that you skip at least one line between these sections because we want to keep it nice and neat. While some of you don't have the best handwriting, there's no reason that your notebook cannot be neatly done. because it doesn't take really that much work. So I'm going to skip a line or two here. The next thing we write is the introduction. Okay, the introduction. Now, you have gotten a handout of examples, or at least an example of all this stuff. So I'm not going to write a whole example here. I'm just going to summarize what it is that these things contain. The introduction, it is the purpose of the lab, of the experiment. So I was going to write there. There you go, of the experiment. So in other words, it answers the questions very briefly. What are you going to do? And how are you going to do it? This may only be 2, 3, 4 sentences. When we say, what are you going to do, just a very brief statement of the purpose. How are you going to do it? That is not a full summary of the whole procedure. You might list a simple technique that you're going to use, or maybe some special piece of equipment that will be required that you're going to use. It does not summarize everything. This is just a very brief glimpse as to what it is that's going to happen. So if I were going to read this, if I were to say flipping through this in a journal article, I could read your introduction and decide very quickly if it was of interest to me. And I can make that decision based on what you've written in the introduction. All right, after the introduction, you will answer the pre-lab questions. Again, notice how I have skipped a line between the introduction and the pre-lab questions. Again, want to keep it nice and neat. I would recommend underlining the headings. You could center them too. That's really up to you. It is your notebook after all. And these, you'll just answer the questions provided to you. Now, that being said, if it is something that you're writing text for, okay, we always use complete sentences. Use complete sentences. Notice I am writing this in all capital letters because this is important. I do not want to read some sort of 2-word answer for something that requires some thought. Not only should we write in complete sentences, but we always want to answer the questions in a way as if it was just more of a discussion, not that we were answering a specific question. So the way to do that is to rephrase rephrase the question in your answer. And for examples of that, please see the handout that you've received on keeping a lab notebook. All right, so you answer all the pre-lab questions using complete sentences. If it's a calculation, you don't need to write a sentence showing all your work. I should write that here. I'll do that in all capital letters too. Show all work. If it's a calculation, then that is your sentence by and large. But show all your work. We should never just see just an answer. Show all your work in there. Again, nice and neat. Show all your units. It makes it much easier to follow. All right, after we have the pre-lab questions, next comes the procedure. So these are the steps of doing the lab, if you will. Now, in the past, I've asked students to just write in the procedure from the handout for the lab given to them. The reason I've asked them to do this is A, so I know that they've read it, and B, at least I know that they've thought about it a little bit while they're writing it down. I don't think I'm going to have you do that, though, unless you want to. So you can go through and write it out by hand. If you want to copy your lab handout, cut it out, and paste it into your notebook, that is also acceptable. If you want to type it up and print that out and paste it in. But no matter how it ends up here, it needs to be the exact same procedure that was given to you. Okay. Now, if you are simply copying and cutting it and gluing it in here, you must read it. Okay, you must read before lab. Notice before. The reason it's important that you do that is so that you are familiar with what it is that you will be doing. It will make you much more efficient in your lab work. So you have the procedure in there. There's really only one other thing that you might have in your notebook before we start, and that would be any data tables. So next section will be data and observations. What you need to do is you need to get data tables in here. You need to construct them yourselves. Okay, construct data tables neatly yourself. Now, if there is a data table that's included in the handout given to you, you're welcome just to reproduce that in here. But I want you to do it yourself because it gets you familiar with doing that, because there will be a lot of times where you won't have an example to follow, and it's nice to have done that before then. So when we say neatly, you don't necessarily have to use a straight edge, but do not under any circumstances just quickly slop down a data table with very poor lines and poor labels. That will not work. Okay, make sure it's neatly done. That way it's easy to read. After your data section and observations, so you'll obviously be recording stuff in there while you're doing the lab. After that would come calculations, and this obviously is not something that you would do before lab because you haven't done it yet. We have calculations and analysis. Okay, and really this is very similar to the pre-lab questions. I'm just going to write here C pre-lab questions. If you have a calculation that you're doing, you need to show all the work. If it's a question that you're answering, that like a sentence or sentences for, then you need to use complete sentences. You must rephrase the question in your answer. The last part of your lab notebook, after the calculations and analysis, is your conclusion. Okay. Again, you can see the example I've given to you on the lab notebook handout, but just a few key ideas here. The easiest way to write your conclusion is simply to rephrase the introduction. So if you've written a good introduction, you can simply go back and rephrase that as your conclusion. So your introduction is, what are you going to do? So your introduction might say, in this lab we are going to do blank, whatever that is. Your conclusion might start with, in this lab we did this, blank. So you're just rephrasing what you wrote. You could also write how you did this. We did this by doing this or using that. And then you give the results. Give results. This is something students often forget. Give results. Okay, that is really the main idea of what the conclusion is. Things that the conclusion is not. It is not a statement of success or failure, so you're not going to say, we did really well on the lab, we did very poorly on the lab. It's not your chance to opine to say this lab was awesome, this lab was really not very good, I didn't like it. Complain about equipment. That's not the purpose of the conclusion. Okay, the conclusion is simply to rephrase your introduction and to give the results of your investigation. And that is how you keep a lab notebook.